right, so let's take up the question, move into theology from here, from science. And just so someone raised the point at the break here, we are not schizophrenic. She reminded me, she's a psychiatrist, you know, that's a whole different, I only say these things only, really, they're just sort of quips, but I don't want you to feel like you have any kind of condition of schizophrenia or anything, so. All right, let's take up the question that Teilhard was really engaged in. Who will give evolution its own God? This is a big question. I mean, we can't use the language of God too readily. I think we can't just keep importing stuff, you know, from the Middle Ages or from the early church into the, you know, we're all over the map, quite honestly. Paul Tillich, a wonderful theologian in the 20th century, said, "There lies beneath the surface of our lives an infinite and inexhaustible dimension of depth. Core mystery, the dimension of inexhaustibility." He says, a depth dimension that overflows with meaning, the excess of all phenomenon. It is the experienced ultimacy of being and meaning. It is the realm of ultimate concern. The name of this infinite and inexhaustible depth is God. It's a name we give to this inexhaustible depth that it's at the heart of our lives, that's at the heart of all life itself. And as Matt was saying yesterday, you know, it's one of names. You know, so many people say, well, the name God just conjures up all sorts of stuff for me. Can I find another name for God? Sure. What's the name of your ultimate depth and meaning? It's a deep personal meaning, by the way. It's not like a force, you know, it's not the Matrix. It's a deep personal depth at the center of every individual personal existent of life. Thomas Merton, again, Matt, you know, referred to this yesterday, had that wonderful experience at the corner of Walnut and 4th that he recounts in his Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. Here he was, he had retreated from the world, gone into the monastery, you know, to find God, and that God was ever the more transcendent and Platonized. And here he was standing on this busy corner, and he says, I recognize at the center of our being is a point of nothingness, which is untouched by sin and by illusion, a point of pure truth, a point or spark which belongs entirely to God, which is never at our disposal, from which God disposes of our lives, which is inaccessible to the fantasies of our mind or the brutalities of our own will. This little point of nothingness in us as our poverty is the pure glory of God in us. And he goes on to say, if we could see this point in every single person, the world would be radiantly dazzling with a brilliance of light. God, Omega, the center of our being. We know God because there's something within us that opens up to an inexhaustible depth of mystery, right? And that is the pure glory of God that is within everything that exists. Omega is that which is within and that which cannot be contained entirely by the within, which overflows from the within to the beyond. So God is here and God is future. God is the absolute horizon of creativity, that self-determination through self-awareness and self-love. And as we become more conscious of God, we, in a sense, move toward that God in love. And this movement is sustained by the infinite horizon of the unlimited mystery of God. The unlimited mystery. I can't tell you how many people talk about God like a formula. Like they know exactly what God is and what God is thinking and the way God acts. God won't like that, you know. Oh, really? You know, so much for absolute mystery and unlimited being. I've got the whole God in my hand. God, the New Testament tells us, the Gospel of John 3:14, God is love. Love is not something God does, like, hey, you know, I'm God. I think I'll have some love. Get me some loving here. Love is what God is. Teilhard is saying love is our deepest reality at the cosmic life. And now Scripture is saying love is the deepest reality of God life. Really interesting. Now, love, as we know, can never be static, right? You cannot be all alone behind your computer or in your room, all shriveled up in yourself and say, I love everyone, you know, or I love you, and kind of this general, you get the sense of like a dandelion drift, you know, this cloud of love. Love is deeply personal, right? The I love you is a deep person-to-person center. And that's one thing that love does and tells us about God. God is deeply personal. God is deeply relational, right? Because that's what it means to be a person. To be a person is to be a relational being. And therefore, to be relational means that there's something flowing from you into the other and from the other into you in this dynamic movement of life. And so, you know, Christianity has given the name Trinity to this reality. God as Trinity. But again, sometimes I think, you know, we're kind of like wrapping our heads around three persons in one divine essence. That's something like a three-leaf clover, or if I take 3 blocks of wood, but I put them on the same stand. It's like, oh my God. Trinity, in my view, and here I follow Beatrice Bouteau, is symbolic of God as love. It's the minimum number for love to really be a reality. That's what 3 is. There must be a lover, a beloved, and a co-beloved. That's what we're saying here, right? There's the lover, and then there's the beloved, and then there's what's shared in between, in the co-beloved. So Trinity symbolizes that God is, in a sense, open to, in a sense, newness of life. Co-beloved, where there's co-beloved, there's an openness towards more life, right? There's something about the two that creates a new vision of life, a creativity of life. God could be maybe 1,000 persons. 3 is not ontological here, although we've made it ontological. And that's, I think, a real problem sometimes for why we're trying to get our heads, well, there's God, the Father, the fountain fullness, and there's the Son, and then there's the Spirit. So we're like working our way through, you know, this fountain fullness and this word expressed into the spirit of life. And I think I kind of get this, but I'm not really sure, you know, as my students would say, I'm not really sure I get this. One thing the Trinity does, it moves us into a different logic. Most of our logic has tended to be, even in our old religion, binary logic. Me and God, Jesus and me and you, right? I am not you, you are not me, thank God. Trinity moves us into a triadic logic, the logic of 3, where I am not you and you are not I, but in our being drawn to one another, in our attraction, something new is being born between us. And therefore, triadic logic is, and actually the space of the between is where the newness of God exists. And we kind of know this opportunity. If we were to think in our own lives, what we've been attracted to or who we've been attracted to, and how moving towards that other of attraction has shifted our consciousness, has inspired us to do new things in a way we wouldn't have done by ourselves. And that's, I think, what the Trinity is about: newness and creativity. St. Paul says this, in his own way in Romans. The Spirit is groaning aloud, right? Groaning aloud as God seeks to be born in this new creation. This groaning is because love, the lover and the beloved, are constant in dynamic union. And therefore we have a relational God, a God who hasn't created us, but who is creating us. A God who is loving us. We talk always in past tense. God created me. God loved me. Now God's waiting till I get this all right and go and meet God. Here's a brain cell, a neuron, and here's a NASA image. A relational God in a relational universe. Love unto more love. Life unto more life. Creativity. Newness, that's what we're talking about here. And what we're beginning to see, and Teilhard saw this so well, is that, that the new science is opening to us a whole new expanse of consciousness that invites a whole new understanding of God. In fact, the whole Christian story is under revision in a new consciousness. That my mentor, Ura Cousins, called second axial period theology, or second axial period consciousness. We are brought up under first axial consciousness, and we find ourselves in a new axial consciousness. What do we mean by this? An axis is the point on which everything turns. First axial consciousness was the turning of the rise of the individual, the solitary one, the monk, the prophet, the sannyasi. Second axial period consciousness is the axis of interconnectedness, ecology, globalization, planetization. It's been ushered in since the early 20th century by mass communication, technology, and air travel. Prior to the early 20th century, we didn't know really who knew about Islam, who knew really about Buddhism, except for a few scholars, We had no conscious awareness of other cultures, of other languages, of other tribes. Today, we have a new axis of consciousness with an old theology. It doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. And so we need to begin to revisit every aspect. Who is God? What is the meaning of Christ in a universe that is still coming to be? What is salvation? What is redemption? Because every time I hear about this apocalyptic God, the rapture thing, that's a different universe. That's not this universe. So Teilhard, again, writing from his own solitude, space of solitude, says, the human world of today, he says, has not grown cold, but it is ardently searching for a God proportionate to the newly discovered immensities of a universe whose aspect exceeds the present compass of our power of worship. I can't tell you, and you know this from your own kids and grandkids, how many kids say to me, it doesn't compute. I mean, I'm not against religion. I'm spiritual, but not religious, because when I go to Mass, it just doesn't do anything for me, And that's because they're a slightly different species. They're wired differently than we are. I know it's hard to get our heads around, and you're going, what? I gave birth to this kid. I want to also put this out. The more I look at the Gospels, the more I really kind of question the whole, how would I put this nicely? Did Jesus really come to establish a church with the guys on top? No. Did he come to establish a church at all? Or did he come to, in a sense, reveal to us something about what we are and have the capacity of in relation to God, in a sense, liberate us from the tetherings of institutional religion? Now, I say this because, I can't tell how many people say, oh, no, just don't talk about Christianity. Well, Teilhard didn't look at Christianity as like the religion, ta-da. What he's saying is Christianity is not normative of religion, it's normative of evolution. He said there's an absolute principle of centrality in evolution that we can name as God, you can name it as the one, you can name it as light, whatever name you want to give it, but that absolute center of centrality from the Christian perspective means that this absolute divinity is totally immersed in materiality. There's something that's moving the whole into more wholeness. We know that matter cannot explain its own first principles. You don't have to be a genius to figure that one out, right? Well, maybe you do, I don't know. Anyway. What he says is Christianity fulfills an essential function in evolution. He spoke of it as a religion of evolution. That's the religion. If we are to have any kind of renewal of a religion or religious consciousness in our age, it must be a religion of evolution. Because this incarnation, this word become flesh, again, we've become wired into how we think about these things. This is God becoming God. God becoming God in us. But we tend to think of, there's God, and then there's God's Son, and then we're related to that Son, and then we go to God. So we have something like of a God who doesn't really leave home, and then we have something of a God who's like, the old joke that they had a committee meeting, and then they decided to send the middle child who needed some attention seeking. So, the incarnation is the self of God, is in the self-emptying of God, and we can't get our heads around that mystery. There's no God apart from the self-emptying God. That's in a sense, what we're saying when we say God is love. Love loves to love. God becomes element, God becomes matter, and draws all things through love into the fullness of being or love. So God is not opposed to matter. It's not science or religion, right? God is not independent of matter. God's not like this layer of oil over the water of our lives. God is found through matter. Matter matters to God. Shorthand, matter matters to God. This is Teilhard. We take hold of God in and through the finite. And that's what we're calling, in a sense, the renewal of the sacralization of the world. This leaf. Gerard Manley Hopkins had those beautiful poems on the inscape, the depth, the Christification, and that word Christ, really is, in a sense, divine love immersed in the chaos of our lives. So, Teilhard, of course, one of the reasons he was kind of nixed was sort of a little bit like Matt, original sin really doesn't hold any weight. Seriously, really. I mean, first of all, let's think of this story, right? God makes Adam and Eve, Adam first, of course, and then Eve had to be made out of the rib of Adam, and put him in a garden. And because Eve is made out of the rib of Adam, she didn't have good hearing and, not too bright up here. So, when she heard eat of that tree, she's like, ooh, because that's what happens when you're made of a rib and not of... Teilhard said, this doesn't make any sense from the point of biology, quite honestly. So late in life, he discovered Duns Scotus, the Franciscan, who in the 14th century said, sin, No, he said, no, Christ, love incarnate, is because that's what God is. God is love. And from all eternity, God loves to love and will to love another to grace and glory. Christ would have come whether or not Adam and Eve ever hung out in that garden, right? It's all really because God is love, and love wants to share that love. And Teilhard, when he discovered Scotus, said, he said, there's the theology of the future. Now, it's really a shame he didn't become a Franciscan, because we would have published his writings and they could have been fine-tuned, but that's okay. So